Excellent.
Camera's right there, you can see your.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to have such a great turnout for this program. And it's going to run about 35 minutes. And I preface my remarks with that if you may be familiar, the Citizenship and the Society Merit Badge was developed several years ago. The guidelines that National issued when it was first put out have since changed. And PTAC actually issued guidelines of its own. And I'll have copies of that on this website, as well as the revised guidelines that were issued in 2022. And if you're not using those guidelines, please make sure you are, because it is considerably different than the original guidelines that were issued, and address a lot of the issues that we as a council had raised about the badge and how to teach it properly. They've addressed a lot of them. And what I'm going to tell you is based on my experience with the badge. I wrote the first draft of the guidelines for PTAC, but I've learned a lot in actually teaching it, as I'm sure you have. And I don't have all the answers. This is a work in progress. And so I'm hoping that I'm going to share what I've learned about the badge and how to teach it effectively, and to make the biggest impression upon scouts when they take it. But at the same time, I'd love to have a discussion about how you teach it and what you've learned about it. So maybe we can come away with a better understanding of how to do it. And I'm not going to go through each of the requirements. You all have those requirements available, and they'll be on this website. But at the same time, I'm going to cover sort of a 30,000 foot view. And specifically, what I want to do is clarify the reasons for the badge, identify what I consider to be essential and best practices. They are not the same. And then we can get into a discussion about what works for you and how best to deliver this badge to scouts. The reason for the badge, and some of this you may have been already familiar with, there was a lot of discussion when it was first introduced whether or not we needed this badge at all. Couldn't we just fold in some of these issues into the other three citizenship badges? National made the decision, and I think they made the right decision, it's a separate emphasis. And I think the reasons should become clear as we go through it. Because if you teach it right, this is my own experience and experiences of other counselors I've talked to. If you teach it right, magic can happen. And by that, I mean, I have had scouts in both individually and in groups, not on a one-off either, who have come up and said, this is the most impactful, meaningful badge I've ever taken, period. Now, some of that may be brown nosing, which is fine, but a lot of it is heartfelt. And one of the reasons I believe to be so is the fact that it forces the scout to think about things that maybe they have never thought about themselves. One of my favorite questions, for those of you who don't know, I'm the advancement chair for Portage Creek, and I do a lot of Eagle boards. And one of my favorite questions is, which of the 12 points of the law do you struggle with the most? And which ones do you feel like you've nailed, and ones you struggle to meet? And it gets them to think about the oath and law. It's not just words on a page. It's not something you recite at a troop meeting or at a camporee. There's a very deep meaning with every one of those words in those two, both the oath and the law. And they discover some things about themselves they didn't realize in the process of this badge. I consider there are 4 non-negotiable practices that you need to be following, and you probably are all following them now anyway. but I think it's important to go through them. This is a badge designed for individual and small groups only. Now, I put an asterisk on this because the guidelines do specify that in some situations you can have a larger group, but then they say within that larger group, you want to set up some individual or smaller discussion groups. The point is that every scout needs to have the opportunity to express themselves in their own words about all of the issues in front of them. And you cannot rush the process. Again, the guidelines state that, but I'm going to emphasize it. If you try to, I've heard, some counselors may try to rush it into maybe a long single session, 2 hours, or maybe 2 sessions. I have taken as many as 4 full-hour sessions with a group of 5. Never once have I had a comment from a scout, boy, this was boring, or this was too long. They all get a lot out of it. So if you have comments, chances are you may be doing something inappropriate or find a better way to express yourself. This is not a merit badge that you can stand up and lecture. It's not something, there's no booklet. And you have to frame these sessions as conversations. They're not lectures. The more you get the scouts to talk about the issues in front of them and talk among themselves, and I've seen that happen once they start talking about, bullying or cheating at school, and they say, well, did you see that? And did you do that? And I just sit back and they're teaching themselves. And that's exactly the objective here. Let the scouts do the work. You're there to facilitate, to guide to some extent, but you're not doing the talking, they are. Now, beyond that, the national guidelines give a lot of leeway for councils to come up with their own strategies. And what we've come up with, and this is how I frame it initially, especially with parents, because some parents they'll come and saying, are you indoctrinating my kid about something? And I tell them absolutely not. This is nothing more than an extension of the Scout Open Law at its essence. And we go into a lot of other discussions, but at its core, that's what it's about. It's thinking about what does the Scout Open Law mean? And getting the scouts to think about it in a way they may have never have thought about it themselves. It's important to involve parents. That doesn't mean they have to be there for all the sessions, although I've had parents in my sessions who have sat there the whole time. And for them, it's a revelation. And they come up with, I've had a lot of parents saying, this is amazing. I love this, and I may even ask them questions at some point when it's appropriate. I don't want them to pontificate, but they're part of the process as well. And so involving the parents at some level is a good idea. And I also stress there are no easy answers in any of this. I don't want any formula answers for the scouts. And the fact that the answers that they give today won't be the same answers that they give in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, because they're going to learn over time. They mature, they become adults, they have more life experience. And so the words are going to take on a whole new meaning. They're going to look at it with a different lens completely. I'm not the same person I was when I was a scout. And the same is true for all of them. And that gets the scouts to think about what this all means, what it really means to be a scout. And they find that very empowering. What I do, and you may do it a little bit differently, but in my session, my first meeting is typically a little shorter, not necessarily a full hour, it can be. I sort of gauge it, but I want to sit down with the scouts or the individual scout with a parent there and just get to know them. You know, tell me a little bit about yourself, not unlike we do in a board of review. Let them get comfortable because they may be wondering, you know, there isn't a merit badge book that I can rely on. And they may be a little hesitant to express themselves. And in a small group, some scouts don't want to, you know, don't feel comfortable in speaking in front of their peers. And you have to be cognizant of that and sort of gauge it. What I find if I'm doing a group, I like to have scouts that are more or less similar, you know, usually from the same troop, but maybe younger, maybe older. It's mostly older scouts. They have a better appreciation of the concepts here. And what we do after we've gotten the initial introductions out of the way, and I tell them a little bit about my history, and we find out a little bit about them as individuals. Then we go around the room and talk about, give me your definition of each of the 8 concepts right now, what you understand. Don't look at the guidelines, don't look at the requirements, but just tell me in your own words. Hopefully those definitions will change over the course of the sessions. And then the last thing I do is in requirements 7 and 8, this is in the new revision, they ask that you do community research. And I used to ask the scouts to, you know, come back on the second session and bring an article that you've read or a book that you've read, or in some cases, there are high schools in our district, at least, that have courses on DEI-like concepts. That's perfectly fine. Have you had conversations with your parents about these issues, about family dynamics? That's all valid. I'm not telling what they have to bring in, but bring in something. Well, now they're basically saying going out and talking to a mentor of some kind, a teacher, a parent, a clergyman, you know, a trusted adult, whatever, and get them and talk about some of these issues that we introduced to them at the beginning, and tell me what you learned. It's a conversation starter as much as anything. And that's how I frame my first meeting. And then they come back and then we start going through each of the requirements, not necessarily in order. We can bounce around a little bit because you have to gauge the scouts themselves and let the scouts do the work, let the conversation flow naturally. And your judgment will rule the day. I talk about identities. It's the first one I bring up. And in the guidelines, they mention race, ethnicity, gender, age, financial background, mental and/or physical health and abilities, religious and ethical values, national origins, and language group. But I always talk about, I add to that, and the guidelines specify that that's not an exhaustive list. But I talk about scouts. They are all scouts. That's an identity. They're all high school students for the most part. But they all have different families. They have different family backgrounds, and some are, you know, single parent households. Some will have extended families living with them or close by, and they get together a lot, maybe trips together. There are some scouts that do a lot of traveling, you know, if you know, in a well-to-do community, sometimes these scouts have just been back from Europe or wherever, or they go to national parks, or they've been to a number of places around the country on vacation. Other scouts haven't ventured much past the community they live in. That's a dynamic. That's an identity that colors their perspective on life. And you have to take all that into consideration. and their life experiences. And they can be very, very different. In Latino communities, I've discovered a lot of them, they'll go back to Mexico. I remember one troop that I did, almost every one of them went back to Mexico once a year because they have family living there. Okay. And maybe that's something that the other scouts in the troop didn't realize that he was doing, or you've been to Yellowstone or New York or wherever. And I also talk about being an upstander. We go through all of the concepts, of course, all the individual concepts. But I also talk about what it means to be an upstander, and I characterize it as opposed to being a bystander. Are you just going to watch something happen, or are you actually going to do something about it? It doesn't say what you do. And as the guidelines stipulate, in scouting, upstanders stop bullying when they see it. This means speaking up and or getting an adult to intervene. Physical altercations are not condoned, and they support their fellow scouts. Upstanders support equal rights and equity for all people, regardless of their identities. But I also add the concept that doing right, it's easy to read that on a page and say, all right, I understand, I'm supposed to do right. But doing right is not always easy. And the hypothetical situations that they have in the guidelines, like bullying, like cheating, and that's one that I use a lot because it's something scouts had typically brought up with me. Have you seen cheating in class? And usually they have. And I said, what do you do in those situations? And why? What actions would you take and why? And then I asked them the question, what if the person doing the cheating or doing the bullying is a close friend? Does that change how you would react? That may be harder for some scouts to say, well, if you don't know them, okay, I could take action. But if it's a close friend and they value that friendship, it gets it a little harder. That's something they have to start thinking about. And that's the point. Think about doing what's right is not always the easiest thing to do. Sometimes it's the hardest. And usually they'll start talking about it. And again, that's where magic starts to happen. When they start thinking about it actively and thinking about how does this affect me? Once we get through all of the other requirements, and we can go through them if you'd like. We can talk about any of the individual ones. But in the last 6 months, I've started to introduce the concept of empathy, because empathy is actually embedded into the law and the oath. It's embedded into this badge. National has acknowledged that. It's built into the DNA of the Boy Scouts of America. It just is. It's not spoken. It's not defined necessarily. But empathy is sort of the fuel that drives, in my opinion, everything in this badge. If you have an understanding of how your words and actions impact others, it affects what actions and words you use. And if you have that built-in, instinct, that's great. Most scouts don't. There are some exceptions, and I love to see it when I do. But scouts they're just learning about themselves, let alone trying to figure out what somebody else may be thinking about an issue or about the words or actions that I take. And so I find it helpful to give them a little help, because empathy is a learned skill, and it will deepen over a lifetime. I will react to things far differently now than I did was I'm a teenager. I mean, I did some things as a teenager I'm not proud of looking back. I didn't understand how hurtful the words I gave to somebody were, somebody I liked. But I do now. And I'm trying to help them get into the habit of using that empathy tool, that hopefully if they get into the habit of doing it, hopefully it becomes an instinct. It's just automatic. You're always taking into consideration, you know, how am I being perceived by the actions I take, or the actions I'm going to take? How is that going to be perceived? How is that going to help the situation that I'm in? And to do that, I tell a story. And you may have stories of your own that you will find effective. What I have found is I tell a story that has a strong visual element to it, something that scouts can see in their own mind. They can sort of paint a picture how this feels. So they start internalizing the idea. And the story that I use is an aspect, a story that doesn't get a lot of almost no attention, and it should, and it has to do with the sinking of the Titanic. I asked the scouts, have you seen the 1997 movie? Roughly half or more have seen it. But even if they haven't seen the movie, they have a basic understanding of the story. They know enough to know that an ocean liner, the largest of its kind, on its maiden voyage from England to New York in April of 1912, struck an iceberg just before midnight and sank at the cost of 1,500 lives, while 700 others on that ship were picked up and rescued by another ship, a much smaller ship. That's where their understanding of the story ends. That's where my story starts. And it has to do with the experience of that rescue ship. In this case, it was the RMS Carpathia. Captain Arthur Rostrom was the captain of that ship. And I set the stage. So bear with me. I'm trying to get the scouts to visualize this in their mind. It's just before midnight on April 14th. It's cold. The sea is virtually glass. There's no wave motion at all. And there's no moon. It's virtually pitch black. The temperature, the air temperature is just above freezing. And the water temperature is 28 degrees, which is just above the temperature at which salt water freezes. So it's cold. And at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic strikes the iceberg. And some time passes, the crew is trying to figure out what to do. But at 12:20, they start sending out distress signals. And at 12:20, the distress signal is picked up by the RMS Carpathia. And the message is very simple. This is the Titanic. We struck an iceberg. We're sinking. Come help. Come at once. The Carpathia was heading east. They were going to Europe. They had just come from New York. They were going the other direction. But the captain understood that time was of the essence. So he immediately turned the ship around and headed straight for the Titanic's position. But at the same time, he made a number of key decisions right then and there to prepare his ship to take on what he thought would be the full complement of 2,200 passengers and crew. He thought there would be a ship to rescue. And the first thing he did is he shut off the hot water and heating systems throughout his ship and diverted all the steam pressure to the propellers. He wanted to go faster than his ship had ever gone. He was going to push it to its limit. At the same time,
He swung out all of his netting, preparing to be able to take survivors off in lifeboats or on the Titanic as quickly as possible. He turned his ship into a series of dormitories and medical facilities. He laid out food and hot soup and tea and had physicians on standby. He was ready as soon as he reached that point. The other thing he did, though, because he was going fast, he was going faster, doesn't seem like much, but his normal steaming speed was 14 knots. He got it up to almost 18 knots. And he was doing it navigating the same ice field the Titanic was already in with no light. He put practically the whole crew on standby, look out. And he had to zigzag through this same ice field. He took a big chance, but he felt it was necessary to take. When he got there, the Titanic had already gone down. It went down at 2:30. He got there at 4 o'clock. Normally it would have been 4:30, but he actually made it faster. He immediately started taking on the survivors. They were in 18 lifeboats, very cold, traumatized. Several had died. And it took 4 hours to get everybody on board, get them treated, get them some food, give them a blanket. Everybody pitched in. But then at that point, he had another decision he had to make, 3 decisions he had to make, the captain. Do I stay in the area and troll for bodies in the water? Would it not be better if I rendezvous with Titanic's sister ship, nearly identical sister ship, which was only a day away and had more facilities and more space and more everything, and could better take care of them? And wouldn't it be wise to head for the nearest port, get these folks on dry land as quickly as possible, which in this case was Halifax or Nova Scotia. At that point, I stopped. I asked the scouts, put yourself in the position of Captain Rostrom. What would you do? What actions would you take? There's a lot of, I'm really not sure, or gee, that's a tough decision. And I tell them that, you know, there are pros and cons to all of these options. There's no obvious answer necessarily. The one question they all want to know is, what did Captain Rustin do? And then I tell him. He turned the ship around immediately and headed for New York. And then the question becomes, why did he do that? And his reasoning was real simple. And I tell them, first of all, Captain Rostron did what every good scout learning first aid should do. When you see someone lying on the ground in pain or bleeding, what's the first thing you do? You don't call the ambulance. You don't start treating the wound. You assess the situation.
Yeah.
That assessment may take 15 seconds or 2 minutes, but he put all of these situations in his mind and made the decision to go back to New York. And he actually had a very sound reason for it. First, he said to rendezvous with the Olympic was unwise. Why? Because the Olympic was a carbon copy of the Titanic. And these survivors most of them, or many of them, had already seen the Titanic go down. They were in the lifeboats when it went down. He says the sight of that ship would be too traumatic for them it would just re-traumatize them all. Second, staying on station to troll for bodies would have the same effect. And so he made the decision, and he felt it was the only decision to be made, was I'm gonna take them to the port that they were originally going to, which was New York, which is what they did. He made it in 4 days. And to me, it's one of the most extraordinary tales of empathy, because that captain put himself in the shoes of those survivors in a very traumatic, chaotic situation and handled it brilliantly. And the proof of the pudding is the question that the scouts will ask was, did he do the right thing? And the answer is unequivocal yes. Because the survivors took up a collection. They awarded the whole crew and the captain special awards. Captain Rossman was knighted by the English king, and he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by US Congress. And they all said he did heroic work. That's empathy. And it comes in very strange places. You don't expect it necessarily, but it's a very inspiring story. And the scouts, when they hear this story, they react that way. They didn't know the story, and they thought, this was amazing. I'm beginning to understand why empathy can be so powerful. It should be something that we all strive to do better at. Some final thoughts. Citizenship and Society Merit Badge requires an entirely different approach. There's no booklet, there's no finite set of facts to memorize, and there's no physical tasks to perform or to learn, like tying a knot, or treating a wound, or learning to swim. In effect, the scout is teaching himself or herself and discovers the meaning of the concepts on their own and to put them in their own words and then put them into action. The counselor, us, we don't lecture, we just guide. We're just there along for the ride, keeping the ship in the right direction. And rushing the process defeats the reason why the badge was added in the first place. Let the process take its natural course. And if that means 4 hours and 4 separate sessions, so be it. You can do it in less, that's fine. If everybody gets a chance to really express themselves, sometimes it takes a little longer for some scouts to get comfortable enough to even start talking. But this is not something that you can, in Citizenship in the Nation, Pat will know this, you'll get 20 kids in a class and two or three of them in the back will never say a word. Now, they have requisites they have to perform and they have a workbook. And it doesn't work here. They have to really get comfortable and start expressing themselves. And I want to make sure that every scout gets a chance to express themselves in their own words and to start discovering things about themselves that they didn't realize. This is a copy of the original guidelines that we sent out to new merit badge counselors from the advancement committee. And I can give you a copy if you're interested. And then there are 2 resources. One is, the first one is the revised guidelines by National, revised in 2022. And the second is if you can stand it, a 90-minute Zoom call that we conducted where we talked about a lot of these issues in more detail. And before the revisions were originally made, but I think there are some good nuggets in there that you might take away from. Any questions? I'd love to hear from you what your experience has been in teaching the badge. Learned anything particular in your own experience that seems to work well for you?
Well, I was just gonna say the roundtable conversation. That's what I got out of it. Just because it's in small groups, and the boys really opened up, both with their experiences and what they would do about certain situations. And I kind of wondered if I was doing that right, but it just felt right. And,
Exactly. You were doing it right because they're teaching themselves. And I don't stand up. I mean, I'll sit down with around a round table or at the table and we'll have a conversation. And I'll start asking questions and then they'll pick it up from there. And that's what you've discovered.
Exactly. Present the topic and kind of random.
Let it run. Perfect. Anybody else? Yes.
Second is that, I've, like your head counselor, and one thing that was beautiful about with the topic introduced that I realized I kind of rushed the process. You know, scouting is about reflecting and learning better. But when I did do it, I noticed that scouts I was working with were reluctant to actually speak on the topic. You know, obviously the dive is a deep issue, and they felt a little hesitant about discussing. So one thing I did is I kind of put myself out there. I got personal and I kind of answered the questions first in a way where I was showing like my side, like I really dug deep to maybe some of the history of like what I've experienced and how it's changed me. I even was honest and like, you know, I kind of read what I did or what I didn't do in that sense. And that opened the conversation up once. When I kind of gave myself to the scouts in a way that I don't normally get an opportunity really to do, it really started the conversation to flow, and I was really happy about that process.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. You know, I'll have somebody will raise an issue and saying, well, that happened to me. Or let me share my experience when I was your age or young adulthood, whatever it was. And then often that times that will stimulate others to chime in and saying, all right, what experience have you had? And then you just let the process play out.
You should probably bring in some of the people that's chatting, right?
Yeah, if there are questions in our extended family on Zoom, by all means, you know, put something in the chat.
They have, I got it right here.
Oh, great.
So Maureen went through and made a comment, always happily impressed with what the scouts bring to the table. They're sincere and open and listening to each other. Response from iPhone, who I don't know if that is. I agree with Maureen. A lot of scouts who are sincerely sensitive towards the feeling of others. Jackie comes up and says, agreed. I always keep my groups to 3 or 4. It's so much better. The first time I did it, I had 6. For the first session, it was not so good. Second session, some of the boys had football and couldn't come, and there was 4, so it was much better. So some of the comments that have been put on here in the chat.
Yeah, sometimes after the first session, it tends to get a little better. They're more comfortable. They understand where things are going. And they start thinking, and then they bring back their own issues. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask about that. Does that sort of make sense that if you break the sessions up, then you give them some time to ruminate on some things to talk about, and then you can come back and give a little more energy or thoughtfulness to the topic in the sessions that follow. So that was a question. The other is that I wondered if you preface to say that this is going to be more than one session. When the scouts are about ready to start the badge, that you let them know that this is going to be more than one session, one event.
Good point, Tim. Yes, I do. I tell them up front, we're gonna take our time with this. I'm not gonna rush through things, and I don't want you to either. And I'm gonna tell them it's gonna take at least 3. In rare cases, maybe I can get it done, but I'm not promising that. My average is around 3, and in some cases I've done 4. But I gauge it, you know, as we go along.
The other thing I would say is, have you had any scouts approach you as individuals and then offer them the opportunity to work with others? So do you say, I'd love to do it with you by yourself. Maybe you'd like to invite another scout.
I've done both. You know, somebody who is trying to make Eagle, trying to get it done.
True.
But I will take the time with them. And in those cases, you know, obviously I can't do it on one-on-one. There has to be a parent there.
Yep.
And, but in those cases, I think I've always done it with 3 sessions. Maybe not full hours, but it works as well. I like the small group. You get
I
an
like what you said
interplay
about,
between the scouts.
Empathy being habitual, I don't know if that's the Maripet Giants, what I like said about ingraining, empathy.
You had another question?
No, I was just gonna add, one of the things that you mentioned is that mostly they're high school students, and that has been my experience overall. However, I recently was working with a group of 12-year-olds. And I thought, well, we'll see how this goes, but they were really motivated. Whole different take. It was less reluctant to contribute. They were more engaged than the older kids, like right out of the gate. And I really feel like this could be a good foundational merit badge for them because, you know, these are the times that they're forming what their roadmap is for their future. And it was eye-opening for me, seeing how well they took to it.
Okay. You know, I could see where that might work. You know, if, I guess it would depend on the scouts to some extent.
Sure.
Well, and I'll piggyback off Colleen. I know I did the merit badge at Jamboree with a group of kids that were mixed age. And those younger scouts, 12 and 13, pushed those older scouts in really questioning what their motives were behind their behaviors when it came to the scout law and oath. So it's kind of nice to watch that counter. It's
I like that.
how their consciousness is developing. And then hold each other accountable, at least in that group. And I think there was.
I love that.
Couple more comments from the chat. One of them was that, someone with the scouts, schedules, it's sometimes impossible to have more than a small group. Just because they're all busy and trying to coordinate and get that many scouts together at one point in time is oftentimes challenging. Another comment that is being made in here was that, few scouts have experiences observing others making ethical decisions. Not many experiences witnessing discrimination, bullying, and cheating are topics that stimulate discussion. Hard to get scouts to interview others. That's one of the other things in some of the interviewing parts in there with that. One other comment that was made in here, I've also found having male and female scouts in a small group help. A lot of the boys are really surprised to hear about the girls' experience with being marginalized or discriminated against. It was good learning experience. With that, then moving on here, it says due to the crazy schedules, I have scouts talk to find a date that works for all of them, rather than scheduling a date for them. So they schedule the date and let the counselor know rather than the other way around. So those are.
I know I show video clips of like School Tides, so it's a movie about a Jewish young man that's going to a private school that happens to be Christian, and they find out that he's Jewish. And different clips, Dead Poet Society, same type of thing. Like you can find clips that expose those scouts that maybe never saw that discrimination in a different light, and it's worked well for us.
I've never been a counselor, but I'm coming from outside. The mandates, all the money goes because we give you no money. This, so it feels very important. Like, small ones. Just want to go back to your final. It's not, it's something that you. So I just out there that it's one, let's see, we open up a larger group and disparate groups from underserved, seen setting as the wealthier starts. And then see first how different the experiences are.
So you think in the underserved communities rethink the idea of a small group or?
Right, I mean, it would have to be a larger, because now they're looking at few people from each thing, but now they then actually talking about life experience, they will hear firsthand what the other scouts from different backgrounds are today experiencing. Because like now, I'll give you an example. 260 over. Everyone comes from a certain demographic. Over. One's college bound, many of them have relations in Yale, but that's the difference. Now, if you put someone on Berlin, put Mexico, we don't do two vacations, we help around family business. It's a way mind at the scout level.
My experience with,
Excuse me, can you summarize what's being said? It's not, we can't hear it on Zoom at all.
what KK is talking about is the size of the troop, depending upon where the troop is located in a rich community versus an underserved community, maybe a Latino, whatever it is. One formula may not work for another. Am I?
Putting them in the same room at the same time, you might benefit.
Open up questions.
Right.
Right.
An extension to this is that, like, a concept of, like us as merit badge councils, grab a scout and work on the merit badge. Got to bring it together, like scout from my troop, scout from your troop, you know, because like to bring those diverse backgrounds together, like Peggy was talking about, like, you know, basically demographically, they're all the same, scouts kind of the same experience. My troop out of Hyde Park, for Chicago, we have a diversity when it comes to race and gender, but honestly, they're all kind of the same economic status. So even when I've done the Citizenship Society of Merit Badge, they're all touching on kind of the same keystones. And when you get the discussion is either from me, because I'm gonna have the same background as them, or bringing up like examples of experience. But what seems to be discussed here is like there could be room for beyond the merit badge to just bring scouts from different backgrounds together who maybe work on this merit badge to really facilitate that discussion if you don't have that in your troop area because of just the homogeneous nature of where you're situated.
yeah, my perspective is starting to change. I mean, when we originally did it, I was looking for a homogeneous group only because I felt that the scouts would be comfortable talking in front of their peers about issues that were common to them. You know, they'd get to open up. They wouldn't just sit and, you know, not want to participate. But the exposure to scouts with different backgrounds would definitely be a plus. And I'm interested in the dynamic between girls and boys too.
Oh, that's fine. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always interesting. But, you know, whereas I like the whole idea of it, I think that there could be value to it. My concern is having too many people, then you don't get through all the top, you know, like, for me, like 6 is the max I would ever do, because like the sweet spot is 4 to 5. But we're prohibited from doing this as a large, as far as like a clinic event. But I'm wondering if there might be room for different merit badge counselors working with their individual groups, coming together to do the part where you have to interview somebody else.
So
And that
so
interview piece,
to take the point though, it becomes like a formal screen, citizen endowment level teaching. So if
That actually could work. I mean, we could have a larger group with some of the elements, but once they get down into discussion groups, mix the discussion groups, not just about, you know, interviewing another scout, but talking about all these issues, because being an upstander or at a Denny is gonna be different with every
but you
scout.
would need multiple merit badge counselors, and you have to really
Yeah.
back in to finish up. But I like the idea of it.
There might even be value for the scouts to not be with their, and to have some, be willing to open up to people they don't know as well as those that are in their peer group.
Absolutely.
If I open up and listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment from the Zoom? I think that that's super interesting I like the idea of like the discussion part, maybe finding a way to merge two groups or maybe even do it over Zoom or something. But I would maybe have a different perspective just based on some different DE&I trainings I've done through my employment. I would be worried about having a mixed group of underserved folks with those more privileged, because I've certainly learned through some of the trainings I've taken that we shouldn't be putting the burden or the responsibility to explain what it's like to feel, to be a part of a minority on the minority. And I would worry that some of those students or scouts might feel uncomfortable that they were sort of being used as like oh, I have to come teach these white affluent kids everything they need to know.
I would piggyback on that in regards to, making sure that this becomes an organic process rather than automatically making it a label, right?
Yes.
I mean, just with the term underserved, right, or privileged. I think, taking this idea and with the group, here and on Zoom, maybe developing how do we implement this in a council-wide camp where scouts are already there. How do we do the interview process of, hey, have you met another scout that's different, that has a different background? And again, I think something like that, if we toy around with that idea, I think that can come up with something. But I think that's the key to this whole point is how do we get our scouts to, open or shatter that wall that they may have that this is all they know. There's much more.
Yeah, the camporees work the same way, everybody's lumped together and you have to start figuring out how to work together. And that's a good thing. Yes.
Well, like one of the ways I see it's working, like 2 seconds, thought like my wood badge experience, a lot of that training kind of got tossed together, like for a couple of weekends. And it was good facilitators, like good and excellent facilitators, great icebreakers, games, and obviously if you've been a part of what you understand. And then after that, it's kind of these very interesting and thought-provoking questions that facilitated dialogue. If you ask me, that seems like a good model to get influence, right? I mean, like everybody, you don't want underserved communities to come in and have to basically explain to them what it is like being like the best material out here. But I see the good bad model being a way to kind of like work with that. Facilitating ice breaking games. And then, keying in on very smart, open-ended discussion, a good facilitator to make sure we kind of, like we said before, if it's going off the deep end, kind of bringing it back and stuff like that. It would take a talent and skill to develop, but I mean, we're all here because we care about the scouts. And it seems like everybody who's participating in the discussion really thinks that something like this would be valuable to pursue. So, it seems awesome.
So piggyback on that, as all the people that are NYLT staff adults, there's a game similar to this. It's the getting to know your game. Step 1 forward, start with simple questions, then we get into deeper questions, and start to see, everyone's different stories as they step forward or backward, and you see the group again, because the kids are thrown together from different groups. They start to see things and they put 2 and 2 together, and then there's a debrief. So along that line, camporee is perfect place to do something similar to that. Also, what we noticed at Jambo and NOAC affinity spaces, there's a Scouts of Color, there's a LGBTQ, there's special needs now joining the group, and I'm missing one of the Scouts of Women's and Scouting. And then what you do is you make a central media space. So you give a place where they feel safe first, then bring it back together. Because that's the main thing is like, as scouts of non-majority, they kind of go under the radar, right? They don't want to put themselves out there. But my daughter, being a girl and a girl of color, she struggle with that. So when we give them a place to feel safe first, and then they'll take that step up and like, hey, maybe I'm okay talking with other people. That's what we've seen at NOAC, at Jambo, and then NYLT being the kids that are growing together. Give them that little confidence put themselves out there. Then they say, oh, hey, we're different, but we're not different. No, they come from all over, different walks of life, different, whatever, it's just, we're here, even though they're different, but we're here to see.
But I want to say,
Colleen,
on having multiple counselors in session and rotating them. And by the intermingling, you are meeting. Yeah, so this will become it's not a single counselor session, now it's more complex, but imagine the mechanisms. You see what happened, they will learn so much from multiple sessions, but they will see right in front of their eyes. Many people's lives are not the same as theirs.
I love this.
Matt, do we have any other questions?
A couple more comments that was being mentioned here, was that, use the story of, and I'm gonna mispronounce her name, I know it is, Malala, the, Pakistani, help with girls' rights, etc., but I forget how her name is actually pronounced there. As experience to overcome, who has experienced discrimination. There are also many online clips of interviews with her that can help facilitate that. And then kind of following up with this, there's another comment in there saying, for looking at some of the stuff that they're done as a citizenship and community. Personally, says some clips that are showing in there was some stuff that focus on discrimination. Films, Tuskegee Airman, 42 King, opening up to different things that they have been on. Some scouts have been on.
I also used Hotel Orlando.
Those are different things here. Other comments are being made in there.
I'm gonna say one thing, the one comment that was saying that scouts are having trouble with the ethical decision-making, examples. I think a lot of people are bringing up movies of very famous people. I feel like it would be helpful if there could be something to help counselors reference for everyday scenarios. I mean, of course, these wonderful stories like, they're bringing up are impactful, but they may not be ones that they can relate to in their everyday life. So I think they may need some help in understanding what, if you hear the word ethical decision-making, it's kind of, a big mouthful. They may not know what that translates into their day-to-day, whether they're 11, 12, 13, 14. So it may help counselors to kind of have just some everyday examples on what that means in our life. If you're as an 11-year-old, as a 14-year-old, like example, you mentioned the cheating, right? That's probably something that they have experienced, that they like, should I say something? Should I not? Maybe they hear something being said about another scout or another friend. Those, I think, what I'm hearing is about one example or comment. If that's where they're getting stuck at, maybe they need some further support and kind of just going, let's take the scary word ethical decision making out of it and translate it into everyday experience.
Find stories.
Yeah.
That's what
But they don't have to be these big giant stories like about MLK or things like that. They have to be like kind of more close to home experiences so they can feel a little bit more connected to that might help.
When I was doing one, and we brought up the issue of cheating, and I think at that point, I just sat there for 15 minutes and watched them talk about it among themselves. I thought, this is great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. If you find that
I think
trigger.
we need more examples like that
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
relate to that will generate the conversation.
I agree completely. When you were saying that the first meeting's a short meeting, mine never is because we go through all of the definitions and I throw it out there for them to define them, but then help them refine that idea by using examples and bringing stories into it so that everybody is understanding what we're working with for the next 2 sessions. They need to understand what those terms are to be able to apply them to what we're asking them to do for homework and, the thought process for coming back for conversation.
What I've experienced is I get them, get the initial definition from them, and then they go back and say, how is your vision of what ethical leadership mean? What you said in the first session, now we're in the third session. You understand it a little bit differently, and oftentimes they have. So everybody have, different techniques they like to use.
Mm-hmm.
This was very valuable.
Any other comments with the people online? The comments from people in the room?
If you have any additional comments, by all means, reach out to your advancement chair in each of your districts. We happen to answer any additional questions or ideas that you have a week from now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the conversation. Some of my sessions have been very frustrating because with the exception of bullying and cheating, most kids haven't even thought about ethical decision making, much less have the courage to talk to a coach or a clergy person or even their parents about ethical decision making, looking for examples. What I found, which was actually rather frustrating, is that when you ask them, well, you can either interview somebody and bring back some interview related content, or you can research somebody as a historic figure who had to deal with discrimination and ethical decision making. They all just kind of revert to, oh, we'll talk about Dr. King for a few minutes. Well, I mean, there's great learning to be had in that conversation, but it's much narrower than it ought to be. And getting the kids to be confident enough to engage others in conversations about whether they've experienced discrimination, how they've dealt with issues of unfairness. The conversation doesn't flow easily, and I appreciate the skills of many of the rest of you who've presented or spoken up tonight. That there are ways to try to draw things out, but it's particularly challenging when the kids look around the room and they don't see diversity, or the diversity is not self-evident. Maybe with some probing or some disclosure, you'll find out that somebody has something about their background that's different than the other kids in the room. But it's most of the kids I've taught are from a privileged background and don't see the issue as a larger societal issue.
That's why I like to get acquainted. I will probe them. Tell me about yourself, and I'll share something about me, and at least to get them thinking about, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't make an instant label. We all do that, and we think we know somebody when in fact we know just a little tiny piece, but everybody has multiple identities and they're constantly changing. And that makes that makes it interesting to me. And I'm hoping that the Scouts will start taking that to heart.
Ken, to address some of your concerns, I know something that I have done when I'm doing the merit badge is encourage the Scouts that you're working with to shoot you and the parent like a blind email sharing that concern or that question, or maybe it's even the response. And then the counselor figures out how to incorporate that into the next session. Right, so maybe there is an experience that they've had that they don't feel comfortable verbalizing to everyone, but they'll do it to a single person.
That's a good strategy. Thanks.
One other thing that I've done, and this is actually kind of part of the MLT syllabus was made up. I've done the ethical decision-making presentation there a couple of times. One of the things is that I just kind of mentioned to them is that, okay, in scouting, we go about and we talk about all this first aid stuff. You've practiced setting broken bones. How many of you have ever actually set broken bones? And they're like, no, yeah. And so we go, okay, so maybe you haven't done ethical decision-making yet. this is for you to practice, just like we're practicing first aid, in terms of troop meetings and stuff like that. This is a chance for you to kind of think about it so that when you encounter the real situation, you recognize it for what it is, and you're got a little bit of an idea about how you should react. Because it is certainly, just because they may have not experienced or may not have been aware that they've experienced this, or how they've reacted in the right things, but it kind of gives them that idea, hey, this is a kind of a practice in there. You can move forward and work on this, and it gives them, you might say, okay, what do you think you might do? All right. And that I've seen that open up the conversation a little bit in there as well.
Yeah, I'll have to say that the scenarios that are offered under requirement number 4 have really been good conversation starters because they're realistic scenarios that where the youth are all the characters in the scenario. So that's more of a conversation starter than some of the others.
I also think that for most of us in this room anyway, and you guys can't see us, but we're a bunch of old timers. We've been around for a little while. And I think all of us that are in scouting and are connected to a larger community within scouting, you hear oftentimes, play it through the 12, like play it through those 12 points of the scout law and tell me which one of those don't include some kind of ethical decision making. And they may not package themselves that way, but no matter what's going on in your life tonight, you've all shown up and you've been cheerful. If for no other reason, because sometimes we just fake it till we make it, right? And that is in a form of itself empathy. I'm here, I need to be present, and I need to take the gift that it offers.
Oh, I think that the key thing to build a base is scouts don't feel that they're being judged.
Okay, so we covered some really great things about what works. What are some suggestions when you know that you're offering this, you had kids sign up for it, they had weeks to prepare, and they show up and have nada? How do you draw them out? How do you address the fact that,
Right. That never happens with other merit badges either, I might add. Yeah.
Interview somebody or research somebody, and I don't require workbooks. I don't care if they scratch it on the back of their head or they have it in their head and they're really good at communicating that. I have no really strong requirements in terms of how they deliver it, as long as they deliver it. But when I get crickets, sometimes I'd like to expand my bag of tricks on how to pull that out.
Well, 2 things. One is I lay out at the beginning of the first session. I'm going to expect some things. You can't just sit back and listen because you're going to be doing a lot of the talking. That's number 1. And there are some things that you'll be asked to do that will really help you. And hopefully you're here because going for your Eagle, and if you're going to be an Eagle Scout, you're going to have a target on the back. You want to uphold the standards being an Eagle means. So take it seriously. If we get to the point where you get crickets, I may spend a few minutes talking about why. What are you struggling with? Are you uncomfortable with any of these concepts? I mean, that's why you have to let the process play out. You can't adhere to a script and can't rush the process. I mean, I know that may not be that's not a tool necessarily or a bad answer, but I try to draw them out, and it may take a little longer, but if I can find a trigger, something that means something to them, something that has happened to them, or something that has happened to one of their siblings. Or I had one said, well, we've got a crazy aunt, and she hates everybody. You know, and it sort of makes it difficult. Family outings are not fun. Okay. How do you deal with that? Well, we just sort of, you know, go with the flow a little bit. But, or somebody says, you know, I just had a death, or I just had some traumatic something, and I'm really not comfortable talking about it. Okay, all right. Let's talk about it next.
And that may be where the writing comes in. Sometimes they can write, but they can't.
That's
speak.
that's very,
And someone else can share their voice until
Yeah.
they get a voice. But I mean, incompletes are acceptable.
Yeah,
I'll give you
we'll
6
circle back
weeks.
to you next time, you know, let
Right.
me know when you're ready.
So I know like a example,
And if it's something where they had to research an event or interview somebody, that's not something I can solve in the session we're having. Right? I have to come back to you because you're just not ready right now. But, you know, aside from having those very blunt conversations up front saying, you know, you may have noticed that there isn't a book associated with this. That's because this is all on you and I expect you to come prepared. And when you lay out those expectations and they don't follow through on them, I was just wondering what other people were doing to make sure, you know, and I'll even send an email before we meet and say, okay, everybody, we're getting ready to do this. Make sure you come prepared, which I don't have to do, but I do because, you know, it's what I did. But, you know, I just was wondering if anybody had a magic bullet that will help me through this.
I'm thinking of one situation where I acknowledge that none of this is easy. This is life experience, and you'll be struggling with some of these things, and you'll be thinking about things that maybe you've never considered. So if you need to take extra time, that's okay.
and sometimes getting them on their toes, Colleen, will help, you know, like, so tell me about a teacher or a student or a family member that you've seen or you know a little bit about, like they've shared in class, that's out of your element. You know, I mean, it says research or interview. Okay, so maybe that's the person we need to go interview. Ask questions. So what do you want to know about that person?
Get them to commit to somebody that they're going to seek out.
Yep.
Okay.
And most of them have something in their back pocket somewhere they know in history. Right? The Titanic is a great one.
So, excuse me, about the back pocket. My question, why is that? Can it just be, it's nurtured on the first session, supposed to prepare the sign, it doesn't make sense.
The requirement asks.
That's the requirement is an
Oh.
interview. So, no more, no less.
Couple of comments that were just kind of in the chat on this last one. Kind of what I get crickets go about, and you know, kind of the idea, give them a incomplete if they're going with that. I have gone about and also have found that the smaller groups does make it a lot easier to go about and to identify who is completed and prepared and who's not with that. Certainly, particularly one time I met with the scout one-on-one. Okay, you got nothing? All right, we're gonna meet again and we're gonna talk about this piece. Yeah, simple and easy. That was the simple and easy part on that one. And another comment was there, as an Eagle required merit badge, putting the responsibility on them to do the work may be part of the growth they need for their future success. So, again, matching it with a lot of the comments that we've been saying.
Before we wrap up, one thing is, like, you have a lot of good ideas here, and I wanna make sure, like, especially when it comes to potentially having something at the next council, how do we get that going? Because we have very good energy here, it seems like we wanna, we're all your interests and stuff. That's like a great
I already got the
idea.
list. It's already.
It's already on the list?
So I don't.
Okay, I just.
Now, you guys been whipping all this time.
We also recorded it, so you can go about and, pick up all those things.
I think the question that I have for those that are on the call is if you would like future emails or you want to be included as part of like upcoming planning, if you could let Mr. Troy know in the comments and maybe even add your email, that would be great. So then we know that we're addressing some of the issues that you had on the call, or that we can call on you for service in the future.
I did post my, my email address, pdtroy@gmail.com or ptech.advancement@gmail.com. Either one of those will end up getting to it. pdtroy's a little shorter. ptech advancement.
And I did have a lot of people tell me that they were not gonna be able to join tonight. When can we make the recording available? So I know that I will be sending a follow-up email to everybody that was on the original email, just to let them know, hey, this is where we put the recording, and this is a fee that we ask of you. So if you're interested in participating in X, let us know.
Well, we should post it on our advancement page in our webinars.
Do we also post PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
Is it all right to reference that in special needs and DEI? Well,
Absolutely. Sharing wealth.
All right, we're coming up on 8:30, and I think they only let us have the room till about 8:30, so, so.
Do you wanna just wrap it up for us as you,
Yeah.
I got stuff to say, it's really weird. All right, I'm gonna keep this short, so, yeah. Yeah, please start the time, or maybe I should stand on one leg. Thank you, everybody who here in attendance physically, who's actually on Zoom. I really appreciate it, and those who's watching and recording. This was a brainchild of the DEI committee and the advancement committee, and I think it is off to a really nice start. I think it's really awesome. For those of you who participated and watching, don't forget about this energy. I feel energized being in this room, talking and hearing everybody. Everything was great and it was awesome. Take this energy to your scouting. We're volunteers, right? It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time out of your schedule, but we do it because we love the scouts. So don't forget this energy. Take it with you whenever you things you do. And like one of the brainchilds with this idea is if you've ever had a chance to chat with me whenever I feel in the moment to chat, one of the things I think that's great about scouting is that we are here to really help scouts become beautiful citizens and participants and leaders in the world. But another thing too is that if you really take a look around in the room with you when it comes to the adults that you're helping facilitate the scouts are awesome. And you really should have a conversation with these individuals. I think the beauty of scouting is, and one thing I took away from Wood Badge is like, man, like I see these people all the time. I never really had decent conversations with them. These guys are awesome. Take that energy. When you are out scouting and you're not dealing with a scout, have a chat with a leader. Have a chat with an adult volunteer. Find what their interests are. Share ideas. I oftentimes leave camping trips and I go to Amazon and I buy new equipment because I've seen it there. Or I get an idea on how to do things better. I was taking notes earlier for myself because I figured out things that I was doing wrong with this merit badge and I want to be better. I think this room, people watching the recording who sat live, in our lives, we want to do better with everything. And you want to do better as a scout leader. So just take that energy that we have here from this room, apply for it, and I think everything will be great. We all appreciate your time here. We appreciate you volunteering. Thank you for everything you do for scouting, and have a good evening.
So we have 5.
On the Zoom call?
Nine.
Sure. I know there was no